So in this video, we're going to cover the sketcher. And the sketcher is an important part of FreeCAD. It's how you create 2D planar sketches that create the 3D bodies. So it's really core to it. Now, if you haven't watched the first and second video already, I recommend strongly that you do that. It'll make this all make sense. Now, I'm going to cover creating a polyline because that's what I use most to create my shapes. And then some basic shapes like circles and rectangles. Then I'm going to go into the reasoning behind constraints and how I approach that. And I'll explain what I do first and how I get to a fully constrained model. And then finally, I'm going to show you some things that are new in version 1 that you can actually create sketches on faces and they won't break the model, which is a fantastic change for version 1. So I'm going to do all of that. And again, if you watch the first and second videos first, this one's going to make much more sense. So I've started FreeCAD version 1, release candidate 2. And from the previous videos, we now start up in part design. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to start a new file by clicking this button. And then I'm going to create a part, which is our container for bodies. Then I'm going to create a body. And then right away, we're going to create a sketch. So we don't usually use the drop down to go into the sketcher workbench. What we do is we hit this create new sketch and watch these icons again. It's all going to change and become context sensitive for the sketcher. Now I'm going to choose the XY plane here because I want to draw on this plane. You can select any of these planes, but I'm going to start on the XY plane. Now once I start, what I always do is I check down here to see what this size is, because sometimes you might be drawing in a very, very small size, and that'll mean that your model is going to be tiny, and it can cause some problems when you change the dimensions in a massive way. So if you go from a micrometer to 100 millimeters, it can turn your sketch inside out, and that can be a problem. So in this one, we're going to use this create a polyline. And the create a polyline is my go-to for sketching. What polyline does is it allows you to draw a line, and then the next node will be connected to the next part of the line. So I'll just show you that real quick. If I click a line and move along, watch also, you see when I go to almost horizontal, you see that horizontal line popping up there. That line means when I click this, I'll have a horizontal line. So I'm going to do that. And now the polyline, as opposed to just a single line, is still attached to that node. So my next line is going to be attached. And I'm going to do that here. And then my next line is attached to here. I'm going to go back to this one. And notice that when I go here, it turns into a cross. That means it's going to be connected to that node there. So I'm going to click that. And now I'm going to right click to get out of my polyline. So now I don't have any of the tools selected. And I can actually take hold of these lines and I can move them around. Nothing is constrained. Constraining means stopping it from moving, basically. Nothing is constrained. And then what I do if I want to constrain the shape, I want to make sure that I'm locking it down in relation to this center point. So everything has to be relative to that center point. And so what I'm going to do, these axis lines, so we have our X and Y lines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this line symmetrical around this axis. So to do that, I just select this point, and I'll select this point. I select the axis, and then constrain it symmetrically. So now, no matter what I do with this point, the point on the other side is going to move equally. And then I'm going to do the same with this bottom part. I'm going to take that one, select my axis, and constrain symmetrically. So now I have a symmetric shape. Doesn't matter what I do here. This is going to stay symmetrical. And so to finally constrain it, remember everything has to be linked to this point here. So I can use my dimension icon. Now this is a relatively new thing. This dimension, it'll automatically try and figure out what kind of dimension you want to do. And one of the ones I use a lot is if you click on a point, it's automatically dimensioning it from this center point. So now if I go here, as long as I keep it in the vertical, I'll get a vertical dimension. So when I go close like that, I can get an angular dimension. I don't want that. I can get the horizontal dimension like that. If I want to get that vertical dimension, I go over to this side. Now it's important that you don't select on the actual line, because if I select on this line, it's going to think I want to do an angle, or it's going to create some other dimension. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm away from that line, but I'm in that vertical, and then I'm going to select, and then it allows me to pick. Once I select, it says, what dimension did you actually want it to be? It's 5.9 is what it is right now. I'm going to make it 6, just going to round up. And so now I have a dimension. This height is 6 millimeters from here to here. And then I'm going to do a dimension that's going to go across this. And again, I don't want to pick that across that center line, so I'm going to keep it offset on purpose. And I'm going to make that 60. So now I have that piece already dimensioned. Then I'm going to dimension this bottom piece. Again, I'm keeping away from that center line there. I'm going to just put my dimension in there. I'm going to make that 35. And then you can see that this line now is already locked in place. And the only thing I need to do is to dimension the height of this. So I'm going to take this point and this point, and I'm going to do a height dimension. I'm going to make that 17. All I'm doing is rounding up my dimensions. So now, because this has gone green, that means it is fully constrained. What that means is if I take hold of this line and try and move it, nothing's going to move. I have the message over here that says I'm fully constrained. And what I'm basically doing is I have a shape that is defined and cannot move. The only way I can change that shape is by changing these dimensions or deleting my geometric constraints. So I'm going to close that. And then remember, we just use pads and pockets. They're all of these, even though they're different, they're a version of a pad. So this is a pad, and these are pockets. Just different versions of pockets up to here. So what we're going to do, I am going to pad, and it automatically says it wants to be 10 millimeters thick. I'm going to actually make it a little thinner than that. We're going to make it 8 millimeters. And the dimension is from the X plane. The XY plane is this face here. That's where my sketch is. It goes up in the Z direction. So right now, this piece grows up from the XY plane, and it's growing up 8 millimeters. That's important because when I come to draw a sketch, I'm going to show you what happens. So now if I wanted to do something to this, I would have to do another sketch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that again in the XY plane. And now I'm just going to draw a hole. Now, if this hole was going to be a through hole, I could have done that all in the same sketch, but it's not going to be a through hole, so I'm going to actually do it on a new sketch. The reason I'm doing it on a new sketch is I want to show you this. So where did my hole go? Where did that drawing go? Well, I can select that pad, and when I press the space bar, it will turn that pad off. There's my hole underneath. But that's not very convenient because I can't see the outside shape of my pad now. So I'm going to turn the pad back on. And then there's a special icon over here, which is called View Section. When you select that one, you're now viewing the section at the XY plane. So now I can see my sketch on the XY plane, and I can see the outline of that shape. That's obviously very useful for me to be able to see what I'm drawing, of course. Now, if I want to position this circle in relation to this edge or this edge or this edge, at the moment, I can't do that because I can't dimension from there. Well, I'll just show you that real quick. So if I try that and I try to dimension from here to here, there is no point to select there, so I can't select that. So a way to do that is this icon here, Create External Geometry. I can click that and I can bring in the geometry of that pad. So I'm going to actually bring the whole thing in because it would probably make sense. Then I'm going to I have to deselect this with the right click first, select the pad and hit the space bar, and it goes off. Now you can see, if I zoom in on just a little bit, you can see the outline of that shape. That geometry has been brought in. So now I can literally dimension from, I wanted it to be from the top of that shape to the center of my hole, because that's important to me. And remember, if I go this way, I'm going to get horizontal dimension. If I go this way, I'll get that vertical dimension. So it's just where I'm putting my mouse is changing that. And it automatically changes. So one thing that's important is not to go outside of that, because now I'm going to get angular dimension. That's not what I want. So you can just move your mouse around until you get the right one. Then you click. Then it will give you the option to put in a dimension. So I'm going to say that's going to be 8 from there. And then I'm going to actually do the same dimension. I'm going to select that point, come over here, out the way. And now it's going to let me select a dimension. And then finally, I need to give this a diameter. So I'm just going to make that 6. And there you have a hole that is fully constrained from the edge of the part. So it's actually from this point here, I've constrained to where I want that hole. Now, if I change this pad size, everything will change, but this hole will continue to be 8 and 17 from that point there, even if that point moves, because it's all parametric. So I'll just show you that too. So I'm going to close that. And now, if I want to find the sketch for the pad, it's not this sketch. This is the sketch for the hole. If I take this pad and I press this arrow over here, it will drop down and let me see what's inside that pad section. And that's the sketch for the pad right there. So the way I know that is because it's inside this pad version. So when I drop that arrow, there's the sketch. So if I double click this sketch, now I see our original sketch. And I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to change this to 25. So you can see it moved. I'm going to close that. I'm going to reopen this sketch. And now you can see that it's actually from the new location, which is 25 up, but it's still the same dimensions from there. So it's all parametrically linked. So you're in good shape. If you change the size of your pad, it's going to keep this relative to this point here. Now, another thing I can show you, which I think can help you, is for your sketch, I can rename this sketch and call it hole. And I can rename this sketch and call it wedge. That's my wedge shape. So now I know that these sketches are not just called sketch, so they actually have a name, so I can, when I look at them, I know which one I'm using. Sometimes the confusion can be if this is closed, then it looks like this is the sketch, when clearly that sketch is hiding in there. So you need to know to open those up. Now, of course, the body does the same thing. So if I press that, all of the things inside that body are now gone. The part does the same thing. And in fact, the whole file will do the same thing. So if you're missing the things in your tree, you want to go to that arrow over here, press that. It's going to drop down, press that. And notice when it's closed, the arrow is pointing to the right. When it's open, the arrow is pointing down. So if it's pointing to the right, there's something inside there. And I can open it, and I can open the pad. So again, that helps you to find things when you're losing them. Now, what we're going to do with this hole, we're going to make this hole a pocket. Now, why aren't I making it a hole? You would think if it's a hole, we want to make it a hole. This hole has a lot more parameters. You can do things like sketches and tapers and stuff like that with this hole. I don't use that nearly as often as I use just the simple pocket. So I just want to make a straight hole, and that hole is going to be in the top of that wedge. So I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to show you how this works. So my hole is actually on this surface because it's on the XY plane. And right now, I can't see a hole. And that's because holes go from the XY plane down by default. So now what's happened is my hole is starting here and it's going off into space. So if I want that hole to show up in the bottom of this wedge, I have to reverse the direction for the hole. So I'm going to do that. And now there's my hole. And notice that it's coming up from the bottom. It's not from the top down. Because if I go back to top, let me just go back in my view so you can see the top. There's my top. So if I go to top, the hole isn't there. The hole is actually from the bottom up. So there's my hole. I'll just tilt that a little bit. You'll see it is actually a hole, but it's coming up from the XY plane. Now, if I didn't want it to work that way, I can fix that. Let me show you a couple of things. Again, this is all about how you visualize your 3 dimensions. And so I'm going to turn off that reversed, and I'm going to cancel that for now. So I don't want to make a hole right now. I'm going to go back into this pad, and to edit the pad, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to pick up here, edit pad. And now, if I choose reversed here, watch what happens to this surface. So now the top of this is on the XY plane, and it goes down. And so when I do that, my sketch now is on the top of that part. So let me just zoom in there. My sketch is sitting there on the top. And so now if I go to my hole and I create a pocket, it's going to pocket downwards. And so now you see it on the top and it's pocketing downwards. So it makes an important difference to which way round you are padding. So if I'm padding from the XY plane and I pad in the positive direction, all my holes are going to be from the XY plane and they're going to be going in the negative direction, so I'll have to reverse their direction. If my pad is on the XY plane and I reverse its direction, now all my pockets are going to be on the XY plane and they're going to be in a reverse, or they're going to be in a negative direction, so you'll see the holes straight away without reversing them. So hopefully that makes sense. Play with that a little bit, because that is an important concept of how the sketcher works and how these planes work. Now let's take a look at another option that you have in the sketcher. So I'm going to create a new sketch. And this time I'm going to create it on a different plane. I'm going to choose the XZ plane. And the reason I know that's the XZ plane, if you zoom in here, it literally says it's backwards there, but it says it if I turn this. And I use this center the model very often. So I'll bring something around, and then I'll just press this center, and it brings it over and zooms it in so it fits into the view window. So you can see that it says XZ plane 001, so that's the one I wanted to choose. And when I choose that, notice I'm now looking right at the front of this part. Then we also have a grid. And our grid, if we use this little drop down, our spacing is 10 millimeters. So when I click this, the grid spacing, or the grid, will go on. And now you can see there's a grid there. And a grid's good if you have snapping on. So I'm going to just show you this. I can snap to grid and snap to objects. I'm just going to snap to the grid. And I go here. And now I choose a polyline. And I can choose to snap onto this grid. And then I can turn my grid off. And I want to turn my snapping off as well. Now I don't want it to snap anymore. And I'm right clicking out of the out of that connection. And then you can see the part that I just drew is on the plane. So it's not actually touching here. So if we want to make that a solid part, we have to do something to change that. So that's good, but is that what we actually want? So if I want to move that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this sketch, going to go to my attachment, and again it's got a right arrow, so if I click that, there's something underneath. I'm going to go down to position. If I click that, there's something underneath. Now in this case, my Z is going to be this way. So that's another thing that often confuses people, is if you've drawn something in a plane, the Z is going to be in and out from that plane once you get back to this view. So I'm going to move it. That's clearly going in the wrong direction. I'm going to move it back this way. And I'm going to put it on there. So if I look there, now I have that somewhere on the part. I'm going to close that. And I'm just going to create a small pad with that. So I'm going to pad it. And that's going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to reverse it. And there I have my pad. And it's a little too big. Now I'm going to bring that back in the center. And I'm going to make my pad just a bit smaller so it doesn't overlap that hole. And I'm going to say OK. And now I just padded and added a square that's based on the grid, and I put it onto this pad. So you can move where the plane is that the sketch was drawn on. And what that does is that puts that plane there temporarily for me to be able to pad from that plane. Now that's all well and good, but the other thing is, what if I wanted to do a drawing that was, or a sketch that was on the same plane as this face? Now, in FreeCAD, this version, it's okay to say, click a face and then sketch, and it will automatically line up that face. So now I'm lined up on that face, and I'm just going to take a little look here and see. Yeah, so I'm going to draw something, a cutout here, and put it there. Now, one thing I notice with people, they oftentimes will get into this situation where now I want to do this drawing, but my model is all messed up. So I'm not on my sketch plane, and I want to be able to draw. If I try and draw something now, it's going to be really weird. So you can see it's going in this direction, but I'm not on that plane. So what I want to do is to get this back to the sketch plane. And if I use this view sketch, I click on there, and it automatically takes me back to the plane correctly. Then if I use this one, it'll move it into the view so that I can see everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually delete that because I didn't want that to be there. And then I'm going to go here, and on this plane, I'm going to draw a shape. I'm going to do it as a rectangle, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle like this. Now, when I draw these rectangles, I can actually just put the dimensions in here. So if I wanted that to be a 10, and then I use the tab key, and I make that a 5, press enter. Now it's an already dimensioned rectangle. Right click to get off that rectangle, so I'm not drawing another rectangle. And then if I move it, notice it doesn't stretch, it's just going to move the position of it. Everything has to be positioned either to the geometry or to this point. So I can do the same thing again. I can use this to bring in my geometry. And I'm going to right click. Now, if you wanted to go out of the sketch and do something else, so let me close the sketch. I haven't done anything with this yet. Maybe I wanted to go and look at something, measure something, do something else, whatever I wanted to do, I can always come back to the sketch simply by double clicking it. So I double click the sketch and it reopens it. And now I can go click on the pad, and I'm going to press the space bar. That turns that off. Now I can see this outside geometry. And what I want to do is I want to put a center line in. So I'm going to just add a center line. Now, if I use this line, I'm going to create more sketch geometry. I want to create a construction line. So I click here. This toggles between construction and geometry. And so when these lines are blue, they are construction lines. So now I'm just going to drop a construction line in here. I'm going to tell it it's vertical. So notice when my vertical line pops in. So now I have a vertical line there. And then part is going to be symmetrical around my construction line. Oh, not there. Hold on one sec. If you select the wrong geometry, you can just select off it and it'll deselect everything. I want to select the line, not the point. And now wherever this line goes, that's going to go. And by using symmetry, I can put that in the middle of this. So that's what we've done there. And then I'm going to make a dimension. I'm going to take my dimension from there, from that point, down to there. Remember, come over here. If I go on a line, if I pick the wrong lines, I'll end up doing angular stuff or any of that. So I want it to be over here, so I'm going to select that. And I'm going to make that 1.5. And now it's shown like a light green. That means this guy is actually already constrained, but this line is not. So you still have to constrain. If you want a fully constrained sketch, you still have to constrain construction lines. So I'm going to give that a dimension this way. Say okay. And then it needs to have a dimension from here to here, just to constrain that way. And it really doesn't matter what that is, but if I want it to be fully constrained, I have to constrain the construction line. You really don't need to do that if you don't want to. The advantage of doing it is it means everything is locked down, but the construction line doesn't matter. It could be down here and I'm symmetrical to it. It's not going to make a difference. So once we've done all that, we can close that. And now I have a sketch that's on this face, and it doesn't matter where this face moves to, that sketch is always going to be on that face. So now here's another thing that confuses people. If I pocket this, the default for the pocket is going to be for it to go normal to the sketch plane. So now that pocket is going in this direction. But what if I wanted that pocket to go along that plane there? Well, I can change its direction. So I can say, I want you to go with a selected reference, and I can select that reference to be here. And now if you look at it, my hole is going this way. My hole is going this way, parallel to this line, and not normal to the sketch face. So you do have a choice when you do that. And if I increase this, or if I actually, let's make that go through all. So now you can see it goes along parallel to this line, and it's going to pop out here parallel to that line. If I change it to the sketch normal, like this, you can see it comes out the side here because it's going along this direction. So that's an important thing to recognize, that if you want to put a slot in but it starts on this face, you can make it go in any direction that you want it to go. But the default is to go with the sketch normal. That means I'm taking this face here, making that the flat plane, and then I'm just going straight back from there like I have with this view here. And again, in the 3D model, I just want to show you that again. So let me just do this, move that out of the way. This fit to view, again, if I click that, it brings my model back nicely into the middle. And when you're doing these rotations, for me, I press the middle button and I can do my rotation. If you watch that little dot that pops up, that's the point at which you're rotating around. So sometimes if you do it over here, now you're rotating around a dot that's over here, and you rotate the whole model out of view. And then you're like, what happened? I've lost everything. Just hit this guy again, and you bring it back. So it keeps you always confined what you need and where it is. So I think I've shown you all of the things that I wanted to show you just to get started with the Sketcher. What I recommend is that you take time to go through and just play with those options. Remember, you can't break anything. If you get stuck, sometimes when you get stuck, like if you try and doing things over here, I already have a task window open. I need to say okay to that, to close that, to bring me back to my starting point. Sometimes people will leave that task window open. They'll try and do something over here. It will yell at them and they're not sure what's wrong. It's usually because you've got a task already open. And remember, I moved my tasks over here for that reason. Yours might be hidden behind the model. So make sure that you're checking that you're closing the tasks. Now there's lots of things for us to continue to look at, and lots of different ways to create things. And what I want to do is I'm going to show you how to create that bracket, and I'm going to show you some linear patterns, which is this guy over here, in the next video. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and if it's getting you started and getting you interested and getting you excited about FreeCAD, please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. If you have questions, leave a comment. I'm trying to answer all the comments that I get. I want to make sure that everybody understands how to move forward. I'm trying to keep this basic because I don't want to jump into all the technical, highly technical stuff and lose you along the way. I want to keep it at a level where you can understand the basics. I honestly believe once you understand the basics, you can build from there. So again, if you've enjoyed the video, this is Adventures in Creation. If you really didn't like it, I'm Mango Jelly. I'll see you in the next one.